Hey, yo, it's the Memo Show. Thank you for joining me today. It's been a crazy month, so sorry I have been absent. We got evacuated because of the Eaton fire. Our sister city burnt down to the ground. It's a fucking travesty, and words cannot express how devastating this is. We know a lot of people who lived in Altadena. My kid's school is gone. Thankfully, another school in Pasadena has welcomed them with open arms. All their friends, all their teachers are still there. Thankfully, thank God, our house was okay. Studio is still here, thankfully, so I'm able to yet again bring you another episode. This one's good. This one's good, guys. Oh, and thank you to everyone who reached out, worried about me and my family. I appreciate you. That was crazy. Fucking PTSD, man, I swear. I didn't have it before, and I have it now. It's crazy. Even the slightest breeze, I just feel like I have to smell. Do I smell smoke? Where's our stuff? We got to get our stuff. Like, it's nuts the way we go into fight or flight because of something traumatic that happened to you. Woo. Like I said, I don't believe in God, but if there was one, he was looking out for me. Man. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Anyway, back to the show. Our next guest, his name is Guy Leroux. He's a photojournalist who spent his time in Hong Kong to cover the umbrella protest. He was in Lesvos, Greece, to cover the refugee crisis over there. And he came back to a world secluded during COVID and ended up covering the BLM movement and their corresponding riots. He's published 2 photo books detailing these movements and his time entrenched in the equality explosion. He shares with us how his creative passion is fueled, how he musters up the courage to participate and bring these polarizing yet thought-provoking photos to us while being knee-deep in tear gas, and how his curiosity usually gets the best of him to surface. His work's also been published in Men's Journal, CNN, KCRW, the Huffington Post, and the LA Times, to name a few. So listen in on my conversation with Guy Leroux. And if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, Aaron was nice enough to give me permission to showcase his photos along with his context. So again, if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify as he's talking, I put the photos up so you can see. All of his links are going to be in the bio, AaronGuyLeroux.com. Phenomenal work, phenomenal website. I was very excited to talk to a photojournalist because I've never gotten to poke around in the mind of a photojournalist. So it was very interesting, very fun. Aaron's a great guy, has a lot of insight on things that are going on in the world, and he photographs them. He photographs them for the world to see. His curiosity is outstanding, and I applaud him for his courage and bravery to be in the middle of those situations and be able to have the wherewithal to continue to take photos and not let anything stop him. So don't forget to like and subscribe. And once again, all of Aaron's links can be found in the show notes. Thank you, guys. I got another episode coming up soon. I promise it won't take as long as these last 2. I am back, and we are in for some really cool guests and cool projects that are happening as well behind the scenes that you don't know about that I'm going to share soon. So once again, without further ado, Guy Leroux. Cool. So welcome, Aaron. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's kind of funny because I was talking to people at work about the podcast and someone mentioned you. They're like, oh, you got to have Aaron on. And I was like, yeah, what does Aaron do? And they were like, oh, he's a photographer. Little did I know that that's a very simplified description of what you are. because I had the pleasure of sifting through a lot of information and just a lot of great stuff to talk about. So photographer is that's one of the things that you do. Yeah, thanks for coming on. I mean, huge body of work. You sent me an email with a bunch of links in it, and I was spending all Friday going through that stuff, and it's all amazing work. So I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's really cool. So for those of you who don't know, this is Aaron. He is a photojournalist, not just a photographer, and you're also a writer. I'm assuming it seems like your writing is just as good as your photography. So I just wanted to point that out.
Oh, cheers. That's either a sick burn or a great compliment. I appreciate it.
No,
either way.
It's a compliment. Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the photography is fantastic. Actually, it really brought me back to when I was a kid, and we never had a subscription to Time Life magazine, but whenever I went over to like friend's house and they had Times like hanging around, I would always look at them and just marvel at the photography, and your work definitely gives those vibes. It brings me right back. I mean, like right here, yeah, like I love the life photographers. I have a bunch of old like Life magazines and a couple books.
Those are incredible.
Yeah, I love them, but they, your work totally reminds me of that. And I was wondering where you grew up. First of all, give us a little bit of your background, where you grew up. I think I saw something that said you grew up in New England because you were mispronouncing the name of a local park as Nathan Hale or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I could not stop myself.
So what, like Connecticut, New England? Where are you from?
Yeah. I grew up in Eastern Connecticut, kind of rural Connecticut. I mean, the state as a whole is basically a forest with some cities and towns sprinkled in there. So
yeah, I'm from Norwalk.
I grew up in a very right?
I know. Yep, it's my hometown.
Yeah. So I grew up in Hebron, which is around Marlborough, Andover, Colchester. It's just a bunch of these little towns. So little, in fact, that they had to pull from the surrounding towns to make a single high school. Right. So it was like the local high school was like a regional high school made up of like 3 or 4 towns because there was more cows than people where I grew up. Like, I mean, literally, there's like 6,000 cows in a place of 2,000 people.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really go up there because, I mean, Norwalk and Stamford, that's like, like southern Connecticut, right by like New York City. The only time we went up there was like for the casinos, like we didn't spend too much time in Connecticut other than that. But well, that's so cool. Yeah. So Nathan Hale, I was laughing at that because there's literally a Nathan Hale elementary school in Norwalk. And I was like, wait a minute, he's got to be from New England because, Nathan Hale's from Connecticut, but.
No, it was Kenneth Hahn Park, and I was like practicing saying it because my friend TJ, Isaac and Loretta's dad, he's from Maryland, and he just thought it's the funniest thing that I cannot stop saying Nathan Hale. Yeah.
So when did you come over to California? I mean, you've lived in a lot of places, which we'll probably get into, but is LA your like home base?
Yeah, I had lived all over, and I was moving around quite a bit, and even before photography and photojournalism. And over the course of like a decade, my best friend, one of my oldest friends growing up, my sister, and a few other friends, they all moved to Los Angeles. So when I would travel to see people, LA was just bang for your buck. I could see 6 or 7 people in one trip. As opposed to, my parents, they ended up moving to Vermont. So, a long trip to an airport and a 3-hour car ride to the middle of the woods, just see them. Or, I could go and see my friends and my sister in LA. So LA became a base for me where I was always bouncing in and out of it. And I never really properly lived here until just after the pandemic, when my wife and I actually moved here. I'd lived here for 6 or 8 month stretches before, but I didn't really have I mean, I was homeless for a decade, more or less. You know what I mean? I was living out of a bag always. So.
Yeah, you mentioned that you have very little stuff. So if you need to like just get up and go, you get up and go. And I'm assuming that's like the nature of the job. Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of these things where like kind of temperament and the job like met, and I really like developed a very aesthetic lifestyle of just like not really having a lot of stuff. And the lower I got in terms of the amount of things I had, the kind of lower I wanted to see like how far can I go? You know, like what is the minimal I need to actually like keep going, maintain the job, like have dress clothes because like I would do a teaching job, so you need dress clothes for
Yeah.
that. So that's extra stuff. But yeah, I for years I had been just paring down, paring down, paring down, getting rid of stuff at every turn.
Yeah, I lived that way for a while until we got a house, and then I think,
Yeah, the house will do it.
I think George Carlin said it. He said, a house is just a place to put your stuff,
Yeah, yeah,
and yeah, but that's great. So when did you get into photography and photojournalism?
yeah. Well, it must have been about 2008, 2009. I was living in San Francisco, and I had come from a small filmmaking community in Honolulu. I was living in Honolulu for like 5 or 6 years. And after I left that community, I wanted to like keep going with stuff in that vein. And because I was working on a team, we all did different kinds of things. So I had just like a little bit of knowledge about sound, a little bit of knowledge about the camera, a little bit of knowledge about acting, a little bit of knowledge about this and that. So I wanted to just like learn more. I bought myself an HDSLR when I got to San Francisco. And before I knew it, um, within that year, I found that at night I would go out for long walks around San Francisco and take photos. And the more that I did that, it was kind of, it was enlivening because it's like a little bit of exercise. It's some quiet time. I was working real lame jobs at that time, right? Like I was working in the stockroom at UGG, and I worked in a grocery store. So it's just really like hanging on by my fingernails. And that time walking around the city and making photos was like, it just became the best part of every day. And I really fell in love with still photography at that time. Like I had considered it. I was a fan of, stuff I had seen, but I didn't like think of it in any meaningful way until around that time I started to get more and more serious. And it didn't seem like the reasonable choice of someone. It's like, this is already 2008. We have the internet, digital life is, blossoming. And I'm like, what if we go back to the early, 20th century and start with still photography? So I had like a war with myself for a few years of just like, this is not a reasonable choice to make for an adult human at this time. But I couldn't stop. I just couldn't stop. I just loved it so much. And, you get that early kind of upshoot in your learning curve, right? Like I got better kind of quickly
Yeah.
because there was so much material available to read, and I was shooting so much that like, just that learning curve was thrilling. So I was like, you know what? I'm throwing all in on this. So by 2011, I think I had really committed myself to it.
Did you grow up with photography? Were people around you, like your family, were they artistic? Where did the artistic part of you come from, or the creative part of you come from?
Yeah, well, my family is they're a bunch of like low key arts and letters people. I don't like my sister would call herself an artist, and she most certainly is. But my mom was a great and prolific writer. She sang, she played the piano. My father had always had an interest in crafting hobbies, just making things, painting things, good attention to detail. They had bought a camera. They had like spent some money and bought an old Canon AE1 when they found out that I was going to be a person. They're like, "Oh, we're having a baby. We should get a camera."
Yep.
Funny enough, I was absolutely not allowed to touch that camera. It didn't matter how old I got. It was just like they just remembered that they'd spent like several $100s in 1978
Mm-hmm.
on this camera, and like I was not allowed to touch it But my grandfather, who was a great mischievous kind of soul, he would always let me mess around with his camera. And so it was just always this object of desire of like, I want to get my hands on that and nobody will let me.
Yeah.
So like I've always had, a strong defiant streak in me. So like, finally getting my hands on a camera after all these years, like it felt just.
You're like, I'm going to do a lot of stuff with this.
Yeah, that's right. That's how I'm going to show those guys. And I'm not going to break it either.
Yeah. That's funny. I think my dad's favorite part of me coming home was that he got to buy a new camera. I remember he always had that thing. I wasn't allowed to touch it, and he had all the lenses and stuff. He wasn't a photographer, but he loved to buy the toys. He was the first person to have like a CD player, and he always had the big camcorders. And I always had to sneak them out of the house to use them too. And me and my friends would make little films and stuff. So it was always around you, and you not being able to really use it kind of pushed your desire to use it as best and as often as you could.
Yeah, like that desire, like that old thing of growing up not being allowed to touch it, and then my interest in it, they kind of like they came together at that time in 2008 to 2011 and really bloomed into what became my life now.
And what about things like inspirations around the house, like the Life magazines, the Time Life magazines? What were some things that really got you into learning more about it and pushing your interest further?
Yeah, it very much that kind of stuff. We always had Nat Geo in the house. Like I said, my parents and my sister, they were prolific readers when I was a kid. I read a lot now, but as a kid, you could not keep a book in my hands. I wanted to go outside. I wanted to play. And that was very much the driving force for many years. Like in some ways it still is now, right? Like I wanted to get out over the horizon as quickly as possible. I felt ready to leave Connecticut after I got off the bus my first day of kindergarten. I was just like, okay, that's enough for me. I'm ready to go deal with the world now. I really wanted to get out there and explore and travel. And that was a big driver of that. So like when that desire for travel and the camera met, it was just like, oh, obviously, like it's a natural fit, but it took half a lifetime to put those things together.
Yeah, sometimes it does. So when you were in San Francisco, that's when it like clicked with you that this is what you wanted to do. And from there, where did you take it? What kind of steps did you take it to the next level?
Yeah, it was a weird time because it's like, okay, I want to do this. What do you do? How do you do it? Right. It's like something you have to Google, like, how do I become a photographer? Take a lot of pictures, make a portfolio, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, yeah, I'm doing that, but it's just me walking around. I don't feel like I'm doing anything. So I did what a lot of people do. I started with street photography, right? I'm just out and about in San Francisco and then in Portland, shooting on the street, taking photos, and talking to people. It's a nice way to like, meet with and stumble into conversations with people. So it's rich in that way. Then when I was in Portland, I went and signed up for, I signed up for LA Fitness. I got a membership at the gym. The guy who signed me up used to be a running back for the Kansas City Chiefs back in the day until he broke his femur. He broke his leg, and he had pivoted his whole athletic career into becoming a fitness model. And he needed some photos. So he's like, you're just starting out. I need headshots and stuff because, Nike and their big ad agency, that's all in Oregon. So he's like, why don't you take some photos for me? And I'll put your name out around town in all the circles I'm doing, and I'll get some other people to come and they'll take photos with you. So I started doing headshots for him. And, I shot thousands of photos of this guy, and it was a great way to learn. He was super cool. As you might imagine, he's just like super enthusiastic. Nothing is impossible. This guy played in the NFL. So he's just like, everything can be done. Let's get at it, And so he just had a great attitude about letting me fool around, experiment, try different stuff. And then I did some headshots for his wife. And then he met a bunch of other models at a call for a commercial. And he put me in touch with some of those people. I ended up doing headshots for them. And it was in that doing headshots and doing street photography that I really got to mess around and try a lot of different stuff. And then in 2013, I got a job on a cruise ship as a photographer, which is a terrible job. It's awful, but you get to take a lot of photos, right? Both during work and off hours. I was shooting thousands and thousands of photos every month. So that it didn't feel like I wanted it to feel, but that churn of just actually doing what Google says, like take a lot of photos, that is the way. It's just that you have to take whatever you think of as a lot and multiply it by like 4 or 5, right?
Yeah.
That's what a lot is. A lot is 200,000 photos. Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the cruise ship because you mentioned it a few times on your website and in different stories. That's where you met someone on that cruise ship that kind of pushed you a little bit further. Yeah.
I met my great friend Ivan Armando Flores, the photojournalist. Yeah, him and I met on the cruise ship. He was assigned to train me when I got on board, and in our little photography department, we were 2 of only 4 people out of 10 who wanted to be doing photography at all. The other guys were doing more lifestyle stuff and studio photography. Ivan actually wanted to be a photojournalist. So as soon as we met, and once we figure out that we both are kind of pointed in the same direction, we just clung on to each other. We interrogated each other at first, like, what do you know? How do we do this? And he goes, I don't know anything. I was like, I don't know anything either. So we just went side by side, and we've been friends since 2013. We've gone every step of the way together, and we still talk all the time, and we're in touch all the time. We send each other photos all the time. Like it was like a friend, a mentor, a buddy, just someone I was on this journey with. And it really, it changed my life. Just like the friendship alone was life altering, but then the photography stuff we learned together was crucial in helping me kind of get along and make my way.
Nice. So is he the one that turned you onto photojournalism? Did you have thoughts of doing that before you met him, or?
Yeah, I had thoughts before. I was taking a lot of photos when I was living in Portland, but I was looking at a lot of photos too. And the more photos I looked at, the more I saw that my favorite stuff, the stuff I was really drawn to, was photojournalism. And then that lit a fire in me. I was like, okay, is that what I want to do? Is that the way I want to go? And I was thinking, yeah, because these photos are inspiring, And so again, it was one of those things. I was like, okay, that's great. How do you do it? How do you do it in 2010, 2011? How do you become a photojournalist? So I was kind of walking around with it in me. And it was, a year or 2 later, I met Ivan, and then we could commiserate on like, how do you do this?
Yeah, because as just a photographer, you got a lot on your plate, but then you add journalism into the mix. So it's like a whole nother level of commitment and, education and learning how to do things. Did you kind of just jump into it, or did you do a lot of like self-studying before you went in? And what was your first like major photojournalistic project?
Yeah, I really did kind of jump into it and study on my own for the longest time. And with Ivan, we were just picking up whatever stuff we could find, but we really weren't sure what to do. And it turned out that the way is that you just go and do it, just start shooting photo stories, but like learning what a photo story is and how to put them together and like what's required. That's a whole, like you're saying, it's like a degree of difficulty on top of, being a landscape photographer. Like it's hard, but a lot of the difficulty is, humping through the woods with your gear and waiting and working out your exposures and making compositions and stuff. The photojournalism stuff was all of that, in addition to like, how do I find a story? How do I get people to let me come into their life with a camera? How do I do this stuff? So my first my first experience of it was actually I was doing a time lapse project in Portland. I spent like a week shooting like 15,000 photos in a time lapse and putting a video together. And one day I was out shooting, and there was a very, very small Occupy Wall Street protest in Portland. You remember this, right? Back in the day, Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
So there's like 10 people in front of Chase Bank on the sidewalk with signs like, "Hey, you guys stole all this money, fuck you," you know. And then there was another group of people at the Bank of America across the street doing the same thing. And within the space of 20 minutes, every single cop in town, along with all their equipment, had filled up Pioneer Square and the main drag in Portland for what was like, 30 something people. And so, which, the police, they ended up being like an accelerant to the protests. Like all these people who were just kind of walking around in Portland that day, all of a sudden jumped in with the protesters because they were like, what is all this? Why is like all the motorcycle cops, all the bicycle cops, all the patrolmen, like everybody in their cars, they had a personnel carrier out there. It was like,
fucking
what are you
cops,
guys
man.
doing? Like
they're always so extra.
Yeah, it was like, it's so extra. It was like, what are you doing? It's seriously like two patrolmen could have sorted the whole thing out. It's just like, guys, stay on the sidewalk, leave the bank alone,
Nope.
But after seeing that, I dismantled my time-lapse stuff and just started taking photos of that. And, later that day, I had a cop point a shotgun at me because I was crossing the street, and I was like, what the actual fuck is going on here? This is like just any given Tuesday, and all of a sudden it's this whole other thing. So that really put the hook in me, right? Like I had already been thinking about photojournalism, but then the photos I took that day and the experience I had out there left me with just a ton of questions. It was like, this can't, like, what is happening? Like, what, how are these things run? Why did that explode like that for no seeming reason, So there were other Occupy events around town throughout that following year. And I basically just went to all of them and started taking photos and talking to people. And that became a really good entree into photojournalism because like it didn't require like building up contacts or getting access. It was all just happening on the street. So I could just go there and take photos. And like that really became my principal beat in photojournalism, with covering protest movements.
Yeah, because you were in Hong Kong and obviously in LA during COVID for Black Lives Matter, and you made a whole book out of the Hong Kong protests. What brought you to Hong Kong, first of all? And was Hong Kong kind of like, okay, the Occupy Wall Street, like you found your niche? Was it kind of like chasing the dragon and you just needed to get back in there, huh?
Yeah, I mean, basically, yes.
Yeah.
It really was.
Because creativity is like, it's like a drug, once you get that taste of it and you know what your purpose is, you need more.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah. Yeah. I was chomping at the bit to get more because it was also like, I found what I'm into and this is really interesting. But then you get your photos back and you're like, there's just so much more going on here. I've just taken a small nibble of like this larger thing. So I need more and I want more. So in 2014, I moved to South Korea. I had taken a teaching job there. So I lived there for 2 years. And the first year I was there, that was when 2014, 2015, that is Hong Kong's first protest movement, the umbrella movement. It was a very similar situation to Portland, right? Small group of protesters out in the street, the police come, they tear gas those protesters, and then the next day there's 100,000 people out in the street. Right? The thing had just blown up into just a major news story all of a sudden. Well, being in South Korea, I was only 3 hours away. So another friend I had worked with on the ship, who became a lifelong friend, Katie Blair, she lent me $600 and I flew to Hong Kong. And that was like, in many ways, that was like my first big, like, I'm a photojournalist. I was connected to an agency at that time, Zuma Press. And like, I went there to like photograph a news event. So I really felt like I was like doing it at that point.
Is that when you were credentialed before then? And I was going to ask you about that process too. So how did you go about getting credentialed and then being able to have access to all of that?
Yeah, credentials took time. I didn't have them the first time I went to Hong Kong. I was looking for a way to do it, and it's a little nebulous, you know. So there's photo agencies that you can sign up, you can become one of their photographers, and you can send them photos whenever you've got photos. They'll put them into their big databases and sell them to people who subscribe. Those guys can give you credentials. So my first trip to Hong Kong, I didn't have any credentials, but nobody cared.
Yeah.
And then it was a couple of years later that I actually got like some cards and some credentials from different places, right? So like I became a member of the National Press Photographers Association. So I got credentials through them. I was also a member through a different agency. So I got a credential from them. That process is weird because like the credentials aren't really signaling anything. You know, it's like if you work for the LA Times and you have a credential from them, that certainly means something. But like a lot of these other agencies, it's just like a photo company who prints a badge for you, you know? So depending on the police, depending on the city or the country, depending on all these different things, your credentials could be useful or they could be worthless, you know? But I learned more about that as I went along. So at least on that first trip to Hong Kong, I didn't have any credentials. I just showed up and tried to get to the protest sites and just take photos with people. And, you know, like particularly on the protests there, they were on Hong Kong Island in a neighborhood called Admiralty, which is basically the center of government. Like the government buildings like straddle both sides of the highway there. In that part of Hong Kong, I don't really look out of place. You know, there's a lot of expat British guys walking around out there, except, you know, they're in $25,000 suits doing all their finance stuff. So, you know, I didn't really stick out so much. And, you know, the protest was like, they were occupying the streets. Those protesters had sat in the streets for like 79 days throughout that year. So for most of that, these are college kids predominantly. So their protest was actually a huge open air study lounge, right? They still had schoolwork to do. So they're out there. They're out there with their books and they have study groups. And there was even there was a quiet like corner set up with desks and dividers so people could like study and write papers and stuff in the street. So they were basically living in the street, but they're doing all their schoolwork. And then there was only a few nights of like big rallies and people screaming and giving speeches and that kind of stuff. But most of it was actually quiet. You know, it's really interesting.
Where did that desire come from for you to tell that story? Was it more of the need to be in the middle of something or the need to tell the story, or did that come later?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was a little bit of both. It was a major news event that was happening close to me, so that instantly put it on my radar. But also that parallel with Portland, that the police acting as an accelerant to the protest. I was like, there it is again. What is that? You know, and I really did want to know. I wanted to understand. So like, why are these kids protesting? Why did the police feel the need to gas them in the first place? And now that they did, it's catalyzed this movement into a larger thing than it was before. And a lot of it was based around, at that time, the umbrella movement was really about wealth inequality and affordable housing. You know, Hong Kong as a city, particularly back then, is a vicious, vicious game of survival, right? It's the most densely populated city in the world, and it's super expensive. And then because of the finance component of, you know, international finance being run through Hong Kong Island, there's huge wealth disparity, right? So those things had catalyzed for all these college students to go, you grown-ups have to you have to do something about this because we're gonna get screwed. We can't even live in our own city, right?
Yeah.
It's like my wife is a nurse. She had friends in Hong Kong. The wife is a nurse. The husband's a doctor. They live in a 3-bedroom apartment that costs $500,000 US. And it was just like $500,000 for this. It's like, you got to be out of your mind. It's
Wow.
bananas. So the kids were really like, something here has to change because we can't, the way they had organized the society was that you have your kids and you compel them by any means necessary to learn English, learn another foreign language, learn an instrument, be good at math, win awards, get a scholarship, right? Like you have to win the game of Hong Kong through achievement and status. You know, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you don't get to choose, It was really cutthroat. So I think the kids were reacting to a lot of these longer term trends of like, what is going to be left in the city for us, And then, because of the reaction of the police, it turned into this whole other thing.
Yeah, I mean that tends to be the history of it. People protest, the police get involved, and things get out of hand. I mean, it's historical. It happens every time. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and I've noticed that seems to be like a running thread through your work is, why? The question of why. And I'm assuming that's what compels you to do what you do as well. But you did happen to get a book out of the Hong Kong experience. Do you want to talk about that? What
Yeah. Yeah. The book, that,
Nature of
that,
Water?
that book, yeah, The Nature of Water. That's a fascinating book. So this is 2019 now. So the umbrella movement protests in Hong Kong they cleared the streets one day and the whole movement went underground. It pops back up in 2019 in like March of 2019, I think. It pops back up and it's the anti-extradition protests, right? And so, I mean, quite literally, everybody and their mother is out in the streets, right? Like
Wow.
all of Hong Kong is participating in this. This is not just the kids. This is everybody. So I'm there for most of a year, the better part of a year, probably like 10 months, just covering this. My parents had come out to Hong Kong for a visit, um, and my wife and I had been living there for a little bit. And just after my parents left, the whole thing erupted. And so I really just grabbed my camera and was like back out into the street. I did not know it was going to happen, but I just happened to be there for it. So I spent the year covering that. And then in and amongst covering that, there's just a slew of photojournalists in town. There's the international press who'd come in. There's freelance guys like myself who'd come in. And then there's Hong Kongers who are part of, media communications, journalism programs. They're all out in the street covering it. And I met a guy in the protest, my partner on the book, Adam Malamus. Yeah, so I met my partner, Adam Malamus there. He's a Canadian, but don't let that put you off him. He's a cool dude. Um, no, he's the best. He was interested in photography. He was interested in photojournalism. He saw the thing happening on TV, and he wanted to go explore it. So he is following me around for a couple hours one night, and then he introduced himself, and we got to talking. And he heard from me as well as a lot of my other colleagues there how we were all living. That photojournalists don't make any money, right? Like we're all homeless. Nobody has health insurance. Like everybody's living, hand to mouth, just to keep doing it. And so Adam is like an entrepreneur, and he was really incensed by this. He's like, that's not cool. You guys are doing like very serious, dangerous stuff out here. He got a bunch of us together, 50 photojournalists that we had worked with or knew or met throughout the protests. We pooled all those photos. So we had something like 1,500 photos, and we culled through them and put together a book of about 350 photos that is probably one of the better historical documents of the protests. throughout that entire year of 2019. And we sold out our first edition run of that book, The Nature of Water, of 500 copies. And we did an exhibition for it in Vancouver at the Polygon Gallery. And, it was just amazing. It was a dream project. And a lot of that is down to Adam. And then a lot of it is Adam and I just like rolling up our sleeves and mucking through another, like, it's a year of protests and like a year and a half of doing the book. Right. Mm-hmm. So it was very intense,
Well, from what I've seen, because I haven't seen the physical book, but I've saw an article about the book. They took really nice pictures of it, and they talked about the design of it and how it looks and feels painstakingly designed. How much of that was you, and where did those design skills come from?
Yeah, that was the design of that book is very much Adam and I together. Adam came from a graphic design background, and I'm coming from the photo book world, which is very much like very artsy, esoteric, single photo on a page, no captions, none of that, right? So like Adam hated that, and I was hesitant on a fully graphic designed thing with like lots of words and the pictures together.
Yeah.
But also it's a year of protests and photos shot all over the city. So we needed a coherent structure to order the book. And so Adam ended up making grids for the photos. And then once we settled on having the book in 4 sections, things that you might not have seen on TV. And then, so the first section of the book is that, right? Like, what does Hong Kong look like that you're not seeing on television? And then the cast of characters, the cops, the protesters, the people, the families, the victims, right? Everybody. So another section of the people involved in the protests. And then the third section is the fog and fire of tear gas and riot police and all that stuff. And then the last section of the book is how we left it, right? At the turn of the new year from 2019 to 2020, that fall, that winter, what did Hong Kong look like and where was it going? So Adam brought that structure and the design to the book. And then once we figured out those 4 sections, it was like, does this photo contribute to the meaning of this section of the book? It made it so much easier to cull those 1,500 photos down, right? Yeah, so it was a huge process of doing that, and it was really, really tough. And Adam and I had a lot of like amazing, really fascinating arguments about it. We had a lot of like 3-year-old in the sandbox arguments about it. It was like, fucking hate that photo, man. I just I don't want it in there.
Yeah, that comes with the territory when you're collabing with people and, when you're working with art. So you're working on a new book, No Walls Between Us, and that is about your experience with Black Lives Matter and COVID, correct?
Yeah. So while I get back to LA, right, I leave Hong Kong in January of 2020, and I'm leaving for 2 weeks to do the exhibition for the Nature of Water book, right? That 2 weeks ends up being forever. Right. Like I can't go back to Hong Kong to this day. Right. So I come back to LA because this is where my people are and I can crash on someone's couch. 2 of my friends let me stay with them. And then, the pandemic hits.
Yeah. Like 2 months later, basically you're in a pandemic now coming back from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And then Black Lives Matter.
Right. So it all goes off at the same time. So at my friend's house, I'm building the Nature of Water book with Adam. We're doing that entire time. During the day, I'm helping my friends who, they have 2 little kids and they've lost school and they've lost childcare. So I'm taking the kids out a couple days a week, and Uncle Aaron is just taking them into completely desolate cityscapes of Los Angeles so they can move their bodies around and, be tired at the end of the day. And then days I'm not with them and nights I'm out covering the George Floyd protests, the Black Lives Matter protests here. So it was like I came back to LA and I was like, oh, I'm finally I'm finally going to get some rest. Like it's been a long,
Little
6
did you
years.
know.
I'm tired. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to kick my feet up. This is going to be great. It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
It was nonstop, So yeah, so I threw myself into covering that. And then, it was one day I was over my best friends, Mel and TJ, they're Isaac and Loretta's parents, the little kids. One of their friends had come over to read a book to Isaac and Loretta, and they sat on the stoop of their house, and their friend Noemi stood on the sidewalk, 8 feet away, reading them the story. And I took a photo of it. And the more I looked at that photo, I was like, there's something here, right? Like these kids are experiencing something wholly unique in their lives, and they're not fully conscious of it, right? Because one is like 2 or 3 years old, the other is 6. Like in what ways are they registering how bizarre all this is? And so, after this is all over, for a few months, maybe even a year, I was pitching out the story of the kids as its own photo story. And I had an editor from High Country News write back to me, and he's like, Aaron, I love your photos, but like the stuff of the kids, it just looks like a day in the life, because there's no sense of the passage of time, right? It's Los Angeles weather, and it's a 2 and 6 year old or a 3 and 6 year old who they have clothes that they wear 3 times a week because this is Loretta's favorite dress and she will not leave the house without it.
Yeah.
Right. So there's just no sense that there's anything happening.
Mm-hmm.
It took me another year to put those photos together with my photos from the George Floyd protests around town. And it made me realize, like, oh, this is much more, there's more here. There's something going on here. Like, this is more now a story of LA, and I'm actually a character in this now too, right? So once I did that, I was able to lay out the first 10 pages of the book like last year sometime. And I was like, yes, I see the way forward now. And I pitched it to the guys at Clawfoot Press who, Eric Westerland, my guy over there, I met him at a wedding for a mutual friend of ours. And I was like, have you guys ever published a photo book? And he goes, no. And I sent him pretty much what you saw there in that book. And he goes, yeah, let's do it. I got on a call with the 3 of them. We were talking about it for maybe an hour and a half. And they're like, yeah, I think we're going to do this. Like, this seems cool. So it was an accident in a lot of ways. Yeah. It was just really weird how it all came together.
Yeah. When's that coming out? And the Nature of Water.
The Nature of Water?
What, is that ever going to get released again? Because I read that it's hard to find.
Yeah, it is hard to find. I mean, I don't even have a copy of it myself, right? Like when I want to see a copy, I have to drive up to Ventura where my friends live now, and I look at their copy, Yeah, Adam and I had talked about doing a second edition of that, doing a reprint, like, because the first book, it's really big. It's like a coffee table book,
yeah, it's huge.
And we sold enough pre-orders, and we raised enough money where we did, like, we blew it out. It's like, it's hardcover, it's gorgeous, the paper is super thick, it's awesome. So like, it's a very dense, heavy book. So we were talking about doing a smaller second edition at some point. But I'm not sure if that's in the works or not. We talked about it, and we were like, it's so much work. And of the people who bought our book, people were happy with it. They were stoked, but nobody was like beating down our door for another book of that. And then particularly for me, after like living through the protests and living with those images for another 2 years afterwards, I was like, I just don't want to look at that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a lot of good memories, but like a lot of bad memories too,
Yeah. I thought I'd ask just in case, anybody was interested. And then when does the new one come out? Because I saw the proofs of it. And I love how, like you said, it took you a little bit of time to realize that there's that duality there where you've got the lives of these kids living through COVID, but then literally down the street, you've got these protests going on. And at least for me, when it was happening, it was so surreal to have both of those things happening at the same time. And I like how the book depicts that. Like you have the calmness and the quietness of, being a kid in childhood, not really knowing, like you said, why I'm home from school and why things are the way that they are right now, but just trying to get through every day. And then you've got this chaos going on at night, for your nighttime. And I love the contrast of that. And I'm really excited to see this book when it releases. When is it coming out?
It should be out. It should be out later this year, probably in the spring. The Kickstarter wraps up in like 48 hours, and it's fully funded, so it's going to be out there.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I think with our printer and whatever edits we have to do, because I wrote some essays. Like Eric, he sent me a list of questions, and I thought they were just for his own edification. He just wanted to know stuff. So as I was answering these, they ended up being these really long emails I sent to him. And then he sent me a mock-up of like putting one of those essays into the book. I was like, oh yeah, of course. Like that's a great idea. Because the thing that's tying the kids and the protest directly together is me.
Is you, yeah.
Aaron, the human being. And then also that plays on, we were all feeling isolated in that way. We're all disconnected from each other. We're all lonely, but also this incredible thing is happening, and it doesn't, like, what's the outlet for it? How do we get through this? And like, also with that, what it did to our sense of time. I haven't talked to anybody who has any clear memory of the 2020, 2021. It's like, it exists in a weird fog in everyone's mind of like, was that during the pandemic? I can't remember,
Mm-hmm.
And also, one of the things that really moved me at the time, and I was talking about it with Mel and TJ just over New Year's here, was that, for Isaac and Loretta, it was not clear what they were getting or what they would remember of the pandemic. But then, I've had these moments with Isaac where there was a particularly rough day in the protests where I saw the LA County Sheriff's Department launch more tear gas than I'd ever seen 30 people launch in my life. It was just unbelievable. It was right by the Pan Pacific Park and the Erewhon grocery store and the Beverly, the Grove over there. Like, it was crazy. And I just couldn't understand. It was another one of those, like, what is it you think that you're doing?
Yeah.
So I'm covered just head to toe in tear gas and my skin is on fire. I'm out there for hours. And I actually run up into West Hollywood back to Mel and TJ's house. And I text them like, I'm going to strip on your doorstep and I need to jump into your shower. Don't touch me. Don't come near me. And don't touch my clothes, right? Because it sits in your clothes and you'll gas yourself again if you throw your clothes down. So this is right at like 7:30 at night. So Isaac and Loretta have been put to bed. Mel and TJ open the door. I'm in my underwear on their front step, and Loretta and Isaac have heard the noise, and they come out and they're like, "Oh, it's Uncle Aaron. Why is he naked? Like, what's going on?" And like TJ snaps at him, like, because we're in like a moment here. He's like, "Go to bed. We'll talk about it later." And I run in and I shower and I get set. And, the next morning, Mel and TJ said they had talked to him about what was going on, but I wasn't privy to that, So like a week later or so, I'm driving these guys to Kenneth Hahn Park, not Nathan Hale, who's a true American hero. Yeah. I'm driving them to Kenneth Hahn Park, and just out of the backseat, apropos of nothing, Isaac says, "Uncle Aaron, could you tell me about the times that you got away from the police?" Right? He wanted stories of me successfully fleeing from police, And so like, that's one of those moments where like, there's a little eruption here.
Yeah.
And I know that this has been working on this little guy for at least 6 days that I'm aware of, And there was other moments like that where he would come out with stuff and it was just like, oh, he understands plenty. maybe too much,
They absorb it.
It was
It's
just,
crazy.
they do. It was just heartbreaking because I felt so bad, and like there was another time I got arrested during the protest for like a curfew violation, which is just asinine. And the same thing happened like a week later. Isaac, tells me from the back seat, Uncle Aaron, I figured it out. Okay? If
I
if
love
you have a
this.
suit, if you have a suit that says please don't arrest me on it, then the cops will know, right? The problem is that they didn't know.
Yeah.
Right?
If only it were that easy, little
Yeah, I
guy.
know. I was like,
We'd all
believe
have
me,
a
fella.
sign on our back. Please don't arrest me. Ah, that's great.
Yeah, so he tells me that and I'm just dying. I was like, oh man, little man, I don't want you to sweat this stuff. Like you enjoy playing in,
Yeah.
Kenneton Park. Don't worry about me, but it was just, and that kind of stuff really, really felt poignant to the time, is that we were all having these heartbreaking inner feelings and thoughts about what was going on. And yet the silence of isolation, being locked in our houses, and even the isolation of protesters, right? Like there's nothing more isolating than standing out there with 10,000 people and the powers that be going, nah, just fuck off, go home. This will be over. We're not giving into whatever it is you think you want. It's not happening. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a good move putting those stories in there because I would look forward to reading the stories that accompanied the pictures. And like I said before, you're a great writer. You have a great way of capturing that moment, not only in your photos but with your words as well. So I would love to see. I can't wait to see that book when it's ready. So just
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah. Thank
share
you.
my
No,
excitement.
I'm excited for it to be out in the world. You know what I mean? I'm really stoked. Like it's just existed like on my wall here for
Yeah.
the longest time, with just me shuffling photos around, and now it's gonna be out there.
Yeah, that's the beauty of what we do, is being able to create something and put it out there. And sometimes that's the scariest part. But I wanted to ask you too about scariness. A lot of what you do takes a ton of courage to put yourself in the thick of things like protests. Where were you? You were in Greece, I think, for a little bit of time. Can you tell me more about that? Because I found that story and that project on your website very, very interesting, because I didn't really know about any of that. I learned it all through your website. So tell me more
Oh
about
wow, brilliant. Yeah. No, that was an interesting story and kind of a full circle moment too. So that's 2016. That is the quote unquote Syrian refugee crisis, which
that. Right.
we discovered not just Syrians. It was a United Nations of people there. There were people from all over the world in those refugee camps. So I had finished my job in Korea, and Ivan was free, and him and I decided to go see the refugee crisis. We were like, what is going on? Like, this has been going on forever. And even though the EU had shut down the borders because people were migrating, they called it the Balkan route. They were walking out of the Middle East through the Balkans and into Western Europe.
Crazy.
So the EU had shut down the borders. And so people just got stuck wherever they were. There was a
Yeah.
bunch of people stuck in Lesvos in Greece. There's a bunch of people stuck in Athens. There's people stuck in Italy. There's people stuck in Macedonia. At every step of the way, people were just all of a sudden trapped, can't go back, can't go forward.
What brought you to that particular place? How do you say it? Lesvos?
Yeah, so Lesbos is interesting. What we had learned was that Lesbos is one of the larger Greek islands, but it's surrounded on almost entirely by Turkey. So people were walking into Turkey, paying Turkish smugglers to get them across the channel between Turkey and Lesbos, the north shore of Lesbos, which is only like, I don't know, it's a mile and a half or 2 miles of water. So it's a point to cross. You can leap the border and no one's the wiser because there's nothing on the North Shore of Lesvos but olive trees. So, well, at least for a time, So we were just curious as to like, this is a tiny island with a very low population. It's mostly a tourist economy. And now there's 15,000 refugees on the island, right? Like there's no way that's not having an effect on the local businesses, the people, the culture, and the fact that people are now trapped there. What's going to happen? Like, how's it all going to work out? And, we're seeing stuff on the news, and Ivan and I in particular felt that we weren't getting the coverage we wanted. We just weren't getting the depth or the nuance of stuff we wanted, which is kind of insane because for a while in 2015, everybody was in Greece covering the Syrian refugee crisis. They every news outlet worth their name had reporters all over the place. And yet we still felt like there was something missing. We just wanted to understand more about it. So, we rented a house in Molavos and we went out there and, we saw the life jacket graveyard, the mounds of life jackets, and we saw the lights from the smugglers on Turkey signaling their counterparts on Greece to say that it's safe to send a boat across. We saw the refugee graveyard of a makeshift graveyard among a bunch of an olive grove where someone had just taken the time to bury a bunch of people. And we saw Moria and Pikpa and Karatepe and No Borders Kitchen. It was just it was an absolutely gut-wrenching scene there, and I think Ivan and I were both pretty profoundly changed by that experience. It was just, it's one of those things, you stand in front of a problem so big that you're like, even if I had $1 billion in my hands right now, I wouldn't know where to begin. It's not strictly a resource problem we're looking at here. We can't just build schools, get people clothes, get them food, and this is all solved. It's like, no, that's the tip of the iceberg, is the living conditions, like where to go, how to get there. They don't want to be here. Just the cultural stuff, language barriers abound. It was an intense place to be.
That's crazy. Yeah. And I read the amongst the olive trees story after that, and that was really profound too. Like the thought of someone doing all of that by themselves, cataloging the dead, burying them, taking photos of them, so if someone wanted to come and claim the body, they could. It's just insane that they were going through that. I mean,
oh yeah,
you mentioned something about the paperwork kind of just going into a black hole to get these people where they are planning on going, because a lot of them have family like in Germany and all these places where they're trying to get to, and they closed off their borders, and some of them are dying trying to. Would you say they would basically play a game and get on a ferry, hide on a ferry, and then try to smuggle their own way in, and if not, then they get arrested, right? They get thrown in jail for 2 days, and then they just get thrown back where they were just to maybe try again in a couple days. That's insane.
It was a farce. It was like a dark comedy, Yeah. So they were a lot of the younger guys. If you're young and single, what they would do is, like, for the refugees we met, everybody's dream was just the next step of the journey, right? If I can just get to Athens, everything will be okay. If I can just get to Italy, everything will be okay. If I can just get to that next waypoint, everything will be fine. So the guys on Lesvos are dreaming of getting to Athens, right? And there's 2 ferries a day. It takes 12 hours one way to get from Athens to Lesvos on this ferry. And these guys they'd come down out of Moria, the refugee camp. They would try and stow away on trucks that get loaded into the cargo bay on the ferry. And if they were successful, then all you have to do is stay in the cargo hold hidden in a truck for 12 hours and hope that you don't asphyxiate, which plenty of them did.
Yeah.
Right. So there's border guards and military and police pulling dead bodies out of these trucks in Athens, almost every day. And like you're saying, right? If the guys, if they stow away in the truck, if they're found, the cops take them, they arrest them, they beat them, they stick them in, quote unquote jail in Moria, which is hilarious that like the refugee camp itself is acting like a prison. And then inside of it there's like a proper jail.
Yeah,
It's
they're already
ridiculous.
they're already in jail.
Yeah.
They
Like
can't leave.
what is jail all of a sudden? The whole island is a jail.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just ridiculous. So yeah, so they'd go to jail for 2 days. They'd let them out. They'd go back down to the harbor, and young guys in the way that they do, they get together in a group. They're playing soccer. They're swimming. A lot of those guys were learning to swim, and they'd sit and look at these trucks and try and like assess their odds.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, no, that's the underbelly of that truck is too exposed. They'll find us. It's like there's good places to hide, but like, I think a guard would find me. Well, I don't want to go in. I don't want to go inside the container of that truck because, like, what if I get buried in there? So they're just whole day filled with these calculations of like which truck at which time, when's my optimal time to try and stow away here and get through. It was brutal watching them dissect this and figure it out, like when to lay your chip on the table and take a chance.
Do you ever wonder if they made it or not? Do you keep in contact with any of them? Or
Yeah, we had kept in contact with a number of guys. Some of them had made it. Like, I mean, per the absurdity of Lesvos, one of the guys we were in touch with was from Gabon, I think. Or no, he's from the Ivory Coast, and he was a chemist. He had like a master's degree in chemistry, and he's from the Ivory Coast, and he's stuck here on Lesvos in the middle of the Syrian refugee crisis. And he's trying to stow away. And eventually he was able to make it to France because I think he had a brother there living in France. And yeah, he was able to get out. He didn't smuggle himself. He was actually able to save up enough money, and he had some documents, because this was another thing. Like they wouldn't sell refugees tickets on the ferry, which is insane because the disposition of every Greek and every Greek police officer and Forex officer and military officer we saw on the island was, we want you out of here. Well, can I buy a ticket on the ferry? No, fuck you. What? Why? Like, what's the problem? You don't have any documents. Well, it's going to Athens and I'm already here and I don't have any. No, you can't go. Okay.
That's fucking
right.
insane.
Everything they wanted to do, every move you want to make as a refugee is met with some kind of insanity like that, right? So this guy, we knew he did have some documents like akin to a passport. And so between that and he was able to scratch together a little money, he was able to get a ticket to Athens. And from there, he was able to talk to somebody who was able to get him in touch with his family in France. And, after some amount of time, he was able to move through. But he was one of the few that we knew of that actually made it through. And he was very lucky. A lot of those people, many of them are still there, or at least still in Greece, if not on Lesvos.
That's incredible. I mean, you put me there with your story and with the photographs. I mean, it was so captivating to read about that little sliver of what was going on over there.
Yeah, I'm glad that had an impact on you. Thank you for taking it in. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes you, like you said, it makes you wonder about what is the stuff that we're not seeing and what is the stuff that the news doesn't cover. I'm sure that's part of what drives you to do what you do. But what do you think about the climate of journalism now with like TikTok and Instagram and people getting their news from so many different places and not knowing what's real, what's not, what is just secondhand, what's made up? How do you sift through all of that mess and find, credible sources and stories?
No, it's the question of our time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a really, really big question of how are we collectively gonna agree on baseline facts that help us take action in the world, and what's the method for doing that? So like at the moment, basically the last like 10 years, journalism has been obsessed with cracking or refining or discovering a business model
Yeah.
that lets you do that kind of long form, long term, very expensive, difficult, slow reporting. Right. And like, that's just what they want, right? They want to do that long form reporting. That's not even tackling the question of like, will anybody believe us once we publish it? Right. Like, just how do we afford to do it? You know, Ivan and I, for all the stuff we did on Greece and for most of my stories, it's come out of my pocket. I do it up front and hope I can get paid on the back end, you know, and then I use teaching to make ends meet. So, you know, I really don't know, man. If I had answers to that question, I mean, I'd be a billionaire right now. Like, that's what everybody wants to know. For my part, you know, I've just like fragmented my journalistic intake, right? So like, I don't read the news on a day-to-day basis because I just don't have the energy for all of it. You know,
Yeah.
it is just the fire hose at this point. But like, if I'm into a story or if I'm doing research on a story or if I'm looking for something, I'll look at certain people in larger media outlets. So like, it's not enough to say that I go to the New York Times for my news. I don't. I go to Zeynep Tufekci, a sociologist who's a columnist for the New York Times. I'll look at her for certain stuff. You know what I mean? So I find individual reporters
Yeah.
who I know to be working at a high level, who I know to be doing good work, and I'll follow them and let them set my baseline for me. And then when I see stuff that disagrees with it or agrees with it, I'll dig deeper into that. But like, I just don't know how any normal person could do it. You know, like, I don't have any kids. This is something I'm deeply passionate about, and I spend most of my days doing it. So I've got the time to root through articles and chase things down. You know, I don't know how a normal person would do it. Like, I wouldn't be getting my news off of TikTok, but also like, if a journalist I trusted was delivering news on TikTok, I might consume it that way, you know? And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's weird. It's a weird world. Yeah.
Yeah. It's super crazy. I barely keep up on news stories now for that same reason where like I don't know what's real or not. And I have enough life experience to kind of know when my leg is being pulled and you know what sources, you know, are trustworthy or not, but the younger generations are going to have just a harder and harder time getting their news.
Yeah. Honestly, just one last thing on that. Like, my biggest defense that I lean on in terms of consuming the news is that just as a person, but also as a journalist, I'm just so dubious of everything I hear. So like, you just can't, like, when you're actually talking to people and doing reporting, it's to your benefit to just not believe anything anyone's told you. Listen to what they have to say, write it down, take your notes. But like, I don't believe anybody until it's corroborated. Just being skeptical is probably the easiest, best defense. It's like, it's the low hanging fruit in a really wild information environment, is like, I just don't believe anything, particularly anything like when people agree with me or say the things that I've been thinking. It's like, I don't believe those people.
Yeah. So, but for you, what is it that makes you say like, this is the story I want or need the world to see? What and what's next? What's the next adventure for you?
Yeah, I mean, I very much just followed my curiosity. I suspect my career would be different or perhaps more lucrative if I thought of things in a more like, this is what the news is talking about. People are doing these kinds of stories right now. Let me get onto a story like that. Maybe I can sell it. I don't do that. I do a ton of reading. I read a lot. And when something strikes my curiosity, I dig at it and I'll talk to people. The internet's brilliant for this too, is like, you know, you can find someone in a place, right? I can reach out to reporters who work at the local paper in Mytilene on Lesvos and be like, I'm thinking of coming out there. What's going on? you can talk to people about it. So like I just followed my curiosity, and that really drives a lot of the stuff I'm interested in. My undergrad is in sociology, so like, large groups, social problems, like I've been reading about this stuff for, 20 something years at this point. So I really use that as my North Star. Like, what do I find interesting? What am I curious about? And per both the first Hong Kong protest, the umbrella movement, and the refugee crisis, I had arrived in those places after the international press left. For the BBC, the New York Times, for all those guys, the story was over. They had moved on to different things. I didn't think the story was over. I was like, just because those guys left doesn't mean that this thing's not still clicking over. And sure enough, there's still a lot happening on those places, even when the camera turns away, Yeah. So I have two projects cooking. I have an LA car project I've been working on for a while. I wanted to do it almost like an ethnographic study, like the life of the city through people and their cars, So I've been taking like photos of like car infrastructure, and I wanted to buffet like what is being a car city, what's its effect on the physical environment. And then I wanted to get like archetypes of people, like I want a couple of days with the guy whose car is his office, right? He eats breakfast and lunch in there, he's filled with papers, he's driving all over town, like a real estate agent or somebody. A friend of mine is an amateur car racer, right? Like he bought a Mazda Miata, he's souped it all up. He's learning how to become a race car driver, right? I spent a few days with him, and I've shot like 6 or 7 rolls of film, just photographing his journey of like fixing, learning, driving. I wanted to get the 16-year-old who just got their license and is navigating Los Angeles with this newfound freedom, So I was putting those things together. So I've been working on that for a while. And I just got back from my long walking trip here, and I had a friend. He told me I brought like 40 rolls of film on this trip with me, and I shot like 21 of them. And I didn't want to just like take travel photos, because it's like it's blue and green and brown and yellow in the environment. Just if you see 5 of those, it's too much. You've seen them. So I was like, I'm not sure what to shoot, but I'm bringing my camera anyway because that's what you do. And she wrote to me and told me, she's like, could you take photos of like what it feels like to have PTSD? And I was like, oh, that sounds so hard, It's like, oh my God, So I was trying to do that. And I got my rolls developed from the trip, and I saw that there's the beginnings of something in there, right? There is like, I got a half dozen frames, maybe a little bit more, of like, oh, okay, yeah, this could be a thing. So I've started like blocking that out and chasing it down and deciding like how I'm going to go do that. So those are the things I've been working on. And then also, there's still some more editing and getting the essays into the book that's going to come out between us. There's still more work to do on that. So those are the 3 like photo projects I'm working on at the moment.
Excellent. That sounds fascinating. The LA car culture thing, because
yeah, it's cool, huh?
To me, that's like coming over here from the East Coast and seeing how reliant we are here on cars it's insane to me. I mean, I've been trying to take public transit and trying to find alternate ways to do the things that I need to do without a car, but it has been a challenge. So
yeah, it's a real thing.
And,
it is a real thing. Yeah.
And even reading about our infrastructure here and how it came to be, and the way that we call everything those, like, the 505 and the culture behind that, and it's all so fascinating to me. So I'm very excited to see where you go with that. But thank you. You gave me so much insight into what you do, and frankly, a profession that's kind of been like mystical for me. I mean, like, to me, photojournalism really allows you to be in the middle of something going on, and you do a great job of that, and I'm so happy that you got to come on and talk about that stuff with me. So I appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you taking the time and the interest. It's like, it's not often, it's funny. It's not very often I get to kind of talk openly and think out loud about a lot of this stuff. You know, there's a lot of time alone in the job, you know, traveling alone, moving alone, doing stuff alone. So no, I appreciate you taking the time, and it's great to see you anyway. So happy to catch up a little bit here. Yeah.
Same. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll keep in touch. I'll let you know when the episode drops. And yeah, thank you. Thank you again.
Awesome.
Cool.
Take care, bud.
Thanks. Take care. Man, what a great conversation with Aaron. Thank you. I want to thank Aaron again. Thank you for coming on the show, letting me pick your brain. That was so cool to hear about your experiences. I also just want to make sure y'all like and subscribe. Boom, bing, in YouTube. Go to Instagram at TheeMemoshow. I post updates and things on that social media. Also leave a voicemail. So there's a link tree in the bio in Instagram. You can leave a voicemail. You can suggest guests. You can come on the show if you have something to share, want to talk about. I'd be happy to have you on. Anyway, thanks again, Aaron, for coming on the show. Go check out his work. His book is coming out soon. The Kickstarter was just fulfilled, so you have a chance to go grab that. It'll be worth it. All right. Thanks again, y'all. See you next time on The Memo Show.